Joint Housing Action Plan. Tanaka Lucy, thank you for coming in, and Tracy at the back for supporting. You don't have to sit way back there if you don't want to, Tracy, unless you're just listening into this.
He's up next.
Up next, okay.
Yeah. We'll call her in if we need it.
For the Greater Christchurch Partnership group, this report presents some of the stuff that has been discussed and a particular way forward, and this briefing picks up Selwyn District Council's part to play in the Greater Christchurch story. Housing has been one of those things that's been on our council conversation agenda for a long time. The decisions that we've made in the past about our parts to play in this have generally been quite historic. Like, I don't think we've sort of discussed what our part needs to be in the last 3 years, and it might even be in the last 5 years. So this report brings up some of the needs within our community, the partners that we might need to work with to resolve some of the issues, and recognising that if one TA was to do this independently, then the outcomes overflow into either Selwyn or Christchurch or Waimakariri, depending on if we were to do it separately. So it's really great that this piece of work's been jointly done. And Lucy, you've been a big part of putting some wheels on the intent that the GCP has had. So thank you. Ben, throw to you. Anything you want to introduce? And then Lucy.
I was going to do all that, but you did that. So I'm going to just drive the slides for Lucy. I know my role. That's all right. But yes, no, Lucy's very optimistic about all these things and throwing herself into it, so it's awesome. We'll get behind her. Thanks.
Okay, thanks Ben, and thank you, Mayor Sam. Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Lucy. I'm the Principal Strategic Advisor for the Greater Christchurch Partnership, and it's really lovely to be here today. And I'm here to brief you on our wee plan and ahead of seeking for your council to adopt it at your meeting on the 20th of March. So I just thought I'd whiz through the issues, the gaps that we're trying to fill, and what the plan looks like. Thanks, Ben. So just before Christmas, the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee endorsed the housing plan and recommended that the partner councils adopt and implement it. And I'm really excited to tell you that Waimakariri and Christchurch City have both adopted it. So we're halfway there, and so I'm very excited. No pressure. So since 2018, the GCP has called for a collective housing action plan. And as you all know, housing in New Zealand is considered amongst the least affordable in the world, and it's getting worse, particularly for low to middle income households. And while historically housing was relatively more affordable in Greater Christchurch than elsewhere, this is decreasingly the case. The market isn't providing the right sort of houses at the right price in the right places. And if we want a different outcome, we have to do something differently. There are solutions to this, but it requires everyone to participate. And Selwyn has a critical role alongside the other GCP partnerships. So I'm going to quickly talk through the issues that we've considered to explain how we've got to where we've got to. So I'll be whizzing through all of these. Moving on to my really ugly bubble diagram that Ben hates, but I think if you bear with it, it sort of helps to frame it up. So what I've tried to say there is New Zealand has this overall housing problem around this mismatch of price, location, typology and tenure, and there's not enough housing, full stop. So tenure being rentals versus home ownership, and the type meaning smaller housing at both ends of the market, but also accessibility. When you think about the 1 in 4 New Zealanders with accessibility needs and an ageing population and all of that, let alone for multi-generational families who might want different typologies of housing. And with respect to location, making sure that the housing that is being provided is in places that are well connected to transport, but also avoids risks such as flooding, inundation and encroachment on highly productive land, as will be outlined by Ben in Opportunity 4 of the spatial plan to follow. So the issue here about lower cost housing being needed, but still good enough quality. So whipping on through, this overall quantum, this is something that I only came across quite recently, and I found it absolutely fascinating. Compared to a whole lot of developed countries, we just have fewer houses, full stop. So we have 38 houses per 100 people, compared to Australia with about 42, the UK 45, and France 55. So that's a huge problem as a starting point. Moving on, thanks Ben. House price inflation is continuing, fuelled by migration. So the net inward migration of 126,000 people to December last year is the highest on record. And domestic migration is a further factor in Canterbury, with 1,300 a month coming on in. And of course, they bring skills and other benefits, but it adds to demand. So this feeds rent rises, and Christchurch has had the highest annual rent increases over the past year of any city in New Zealand. So I'm just trying to paint a picture here for why it's not okay to kind of sit where we are and go, well, relatively we're okay, because it's all getting worse. On to the next slide. The impression again that it's okay here because it's relatively more affordable is falling by the wayside, because Canterbury had the greatest decline in affordability across New Zealand for the year to December 23. So 16.4% decline compared to Auckland at 11%. I found that quite horrifying. And then on to the rental situation. This is particularly horrible because 50% of the children in New Zealand live in rented accommodation. And in 25 years, it's estimated that 40% of retirees will be renting, which means they're on a fixed income, but rents are continuing to rise. So nearly 80% of rental households in New Zealand at the moment have some form of government assistance. And this upward hike is therefore completely unsustainable. So this little diagram is based on figures that are 3 or 4 years old. But what it tells us is that the majority of people in Christchurch City and Waimakariri are under stress, and 40% of the people in Selwyn. So onwards, thanks Ben. And here we have the public housing situation from 2014 to 2023, which shows that even though the supply of public housing has been whizzing up, the number of people needing it has grown even more. And the housing register waiting list has increased from 5,000 people 10 years ago to over 25,000 now. And researchers estimate that there are 100,000 people in New Zealand who are homeless or experiencing critical housing deprivation. So it's a pretty grim old picture. So I love this diagram because it sort of shows that the housing ecosystem isn't static. So what we've got here is the continuum from fully publicly supported at one end through to the full private sector on the other. And as I think about it, we're all a divorce away from a jump to the left into unaffordability, or a lotto win away from a leap to the right into home ownership, with many gradations in between, such as inflation, redundancy, rising house prices, slower wage growth, and the rising cost of living. The nasty trend is the leftward push along the continuum, because not only is it more gloomy as you go that way, it's also more expensive for taxpayers and ratepayers. It means higher cost, and the government spending $5 billion already a year on housing supplements isn't great. So with respect to Greater Christchurch in particular, thanks Ben, the particular gaps that we've found from our work to date is this issue of homelessness, both known and unknown, because there are the official stats, but we found particularly in the rural parts where the official figures can be quite misleading. We've had some qualitative work done in Waimakariri, so we haven't seen that yet in Selwyn, but this all leads to the pressure on emergency housing, if indeed there is any. It can be manifest in overcrowding, inappropriate housing, things like camping grounds, motels and garages. There's also the shortfall in social housing, despite all of the money that's been spent on it. As you've noticed with your top 5 that Mayor Sam put out as the briefing to the incoming government, including that. The increasing numbers of working people who cannot afford housing in the bottom of the quartile of the market, whether it's rental or owning. So that's people that actually work, so income earners. And finally, there's this typology question again. So smaller houses that are not being built, or they're not being built at the right price at both ends of life. So this could be young people who want to live in the same neighbourhood that they grew up in, but they can't because they can't afford a big house. While older people who might wish to downsize can't because there aren't any smaller houses. So therefore they stay in their big houses, which could otherwise be liberated for families. So those are the kinds of issues that jumped to the fore when we started analysing this. So on to the next step. Where we got to The plan reflects the most amazing collegiality between the partners. An enormous amount of work's gone on behind the scenes to define the problem, identify the dimensions of it, and to develop a suite of actions that would make a difference right across the sub-region. We've had input from our partners, from staff, from our champions, which has been a wonderful thing, and critical external stakeholders such as community housing providers, frontline workers, not-for-profit developers, and full private sector developers, as well as other partnerships, especially Waikato and Queenstown. All of the actions in the housing plan are feasible and all would create outcomes beyond which each partner could achieve alone, but all of them require everybody to be involved. So it meets the brief in terms of if we did it, it would increase housing choice and affordability, but it requires resourcing and therefore prioritising and trade-offs. So in a constrained environment financially, why would we go there? Well, I think the research is clear that secure, healthy and affordable housing is the first and most important step towards economic and social prosperity. And it's almost impossible to meaningfully improve nearly anything else if housing isn't addressed. There's the wider economic benefits that WE diagram shows. It was developed for Melbourne, that where it was estimated that there's a threefold return on investment in affordable housing in terms of reducing antisocial behaviour, improving health and life's chances through education and all sorts of things. And the final reason is that we have the levers to make a difference. This includes Selwyn District Council in terms of regulatory settings, publicly owned land and the deep expertise of the staff. So to bring all of the tools to the table to figure out how we as a partnership can tackle it. So I don't underestimate the challenge, but we have a lot to gain by working together and quite a lot to lose if we don't. So this is a very brief summary of the plan, which you will have seen. So there's just a few things I wanted to point out. With respect to the first two actions, we can do this ourselves and we're in the process of it already, which is identifying publicly owned sites that could be appropriate for affordable housing development and determining what's required to achieve this. This, of course, will be a political decision and requires trade-offs, but it's the first step, and that's looking right across the 3 districts and ECAN looking at the region. Next, the mechanisms that could enable it, and that work, that's something that we've already cracked on with. The third, fourth and fifth issues are around setting the conditions to encourage the market to go where it isn't going at the moment. One of those is considering inclusionary zoning to collectively increase the supply of affordable housing. So that is a really good example where, as a partnership, we could do this, but nobody can do it alone. None of the councils alone will go down this path because, of course, that would just offset the problem. And then looking at various incentives for developing it. Number 6 is important, using our influence. This is a very influential grouping and coming together to support wider advocacy to financial institutions to encourage investment in affordable housing solutions, for instance, the build to rent initiatives that are happening in other parts of New Zealand, and also obviously advocacy to government, because there are places where why is this being fought out council by council across New Zealand where there are things that we could do together under a national framework. So that's a quick summary. This is phase 1. All of this is achievable this year, and it creates the platform for phase 2 from next year. I think the plan is ambitious, but it's achievable. But to be useful, it needs to be adopted and implemented by the partner councils. So as I said earlier, I'm really excited that we're halfway there. The problem's fixable not with a single solution, but with a comprehensive plan, strong leadership and collective willingness. And I'm really hoping that the spirit of camaraderie can carry us through. And I invite your questions. Tēnā koutou katoa.
Kia ora, Lucy, thank you for that. And it's great to have these 7 areas where we can have influence. I think too often recently our conversation around housing has come down to what are we going to do with Help It, which for us isn't even a decision about housing. It's about great urban development in our setting and far broader than housing. And so this just explains all those other avenues that we can do that with. We're also in a space where the Selwyn Huts is on our agenda. And next week there's a paper coming where we consider the timeframes for movement of people there. At a public meeting last week, that was one of the key questions asked of us was where am I going to live? What am I going to do with my family? Clearly, people already under stress, and that we are now responsible for stressing further, and have some responsibility to think about homes for those people, or the provision of homes by whoever is going to actually do that. But the incentives here is a key part of that. So thank you. Elizabeth.
The Otatahi Housing Trust. I'm just really curious as to how they finance the and manage the buildings that they provide as affordable rentals. And is that the model, that financial model that you're hoping that you can bring to councils, and we somehow work with NGOs or other providers? Like, I'm just kind of curious. And obviously, we're about to tackle our LTP, and where finance is a massive thing for our community. I guess the sale pitch for our community is, well, we're struggling to pay our own rates. So it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to stretch to then pay for affordable accommodation for us. But I think ultimately everybody would love to see the option made available, but it's the how and the implementation of that.
Yeah, I'm happy to give that a go. So that was a Christchurch City Council initiative. So they moved all of their social housing, because they own quite a considerable amount, into a separate trust. However, what's happened in the intervening period is that a huge amount of IP's been created, and they're really, really good now at figuring out what can be done and what can be done at various price points and using different models. So what we're hoping is to learn from what they've done. It's not proposed that any other council would lock, stock and barrel move down the same path, because it's very different if you don't own the social housing in the first place. But I think it's more about the lessons. So that particular action in number 7 was because they are constrained to only act within the city and Banks Peninsula, but there could be opportunities to use the kinds of things that they've come up with. For instance, leaseholding on public land. So where the land ownership remains public, but the leaseholding is sold to enable people into affordable progressive home ownership and that kind of initiative. So it's not necessarily a direct rates impost. It's just it's to explore what might be possible there.
And the conversation around Otatahi Housing Trust, they've presented to the GCP around their desire to share what has been gained so far, but there was their trust purpose doesn't include activity outside of Christchurch city boundaries, and so there was this conversation about whether or not they could do that work, whether or not we wanted to see them change their purpose, which they felt quite resistant to that, and the meeting was kind of the feedback there, or whether we wanted to try and set something up separately to that, which could then go further or be different or be nuanced to what Selwyn's needs might be, rather than being so connected to what Otatahi Housing Trust were already doing. So there was a few different options of pathways here, and I know Sharon is also interested in other CHIPS ways of connecting with us beyond Otatahi Housing Trust. They're raised here because of the connection to Christchurch City and the activity already underway, rather than being prescriptive that we must work with them. This is options.
Well, kia ora. I just want to offer my support for us for this particular action plan. It's needed. In a different life, prior to coming here, I did work as an advisor into the GCP, and the reason I really support this is that this is an area that Mana Whenua consistently said we wanted to see more action out of a collective approach, because our background is our continuum, right? Our Māori continuum is that often our people are in the groups, so overrepresented in the homelessness groups and in the social housing. So that's only one part of our story, though. The other part of our story, which is a total disconnect, is that we're very experienced developers, right? Ngāi Tahu property, we develop a lot of development. So we've got great background in doing commercial work. We have partnership reach into different types of access to funding that others might not have. And we have relationships with the CHIPS and social housing providers in kāinga ora. What I see in other councils, which could be something that we could explore post this action plan is partnering with developers and entities like Kāinga Ora. An example of that is Belgrove, where they got the Infrastructure Accelerator Fund for 800 houses or something like that. So by us being able to actually go forward and have our own housing strategy and a housing action plan that's part of a wider collective is something that I wholly endorse because our continuum in the Māori environment too is extreme, and we can bring that together to be able to provide some real input. So just wanted to offer a comment of support and good work, well done.
Kia ora.
Is there anything in that, Lucy, you want to comment on?
Yes, thank you, Megan. That's great. And we are also very hopeful. We've tried to work very closely with Mana Whenua to make sure that the Kāinga Nohoanga strategy and our plan is helpful to that. And even as we've worked through, it's always started thinking creatively about how, for instance, in the first action, once the land is mapped, once we see what's there, when there are things that might be contiguous with Mana Whenua land or where there are opportunities there to try and make it easier to work together, because basically we're trying to look under every rock to see how we can improve things across the board. So we're very grateful for your support and work. Kia ora.
Sophie.
Yeah, kia ora, Lucy. Thank
Kia
you
ora,
very much
Sophie.
for coming. So if anybody's not met Lucy before, she's like an Energizer bunny. She's really, you're fantastic. So I got to be on the working group with different councils for this. It was mostly people who are on GCP. So there was Mayor Phil from Christchurch, Chair Peter from ECAN, Deputy Mayor Neville from Waimakariri, and Jane Huria from Ngaitahu, and little old me stuck in the middle there. But it was really good, and it was great to see different ideas coming through. And I have, when you showed us that Kāinga Maha model, the diagram there, that was actually really good at backing up some of the questions that that we knew were kind of bubbling in there. It was really good for illustrating exactly what you said. You know, you one divorce away from bumping down the ladder and all that sort of thing. It's housing at the moment is not as stable as we would love it to be. And I guess one thing I really like overall about this whole plan is that it's not necessarily about councils building everything themselves. It's about enabling somebody to do it, which might be us, might be somebody else. It's identifying the areas, plotting out a course for finance, and just saying, let's make it happen, because we know that there's the need, and we know it's not going to happen unless it gets moved along and prioritised a bit more. So it's been a great process, and I would hope that everybody here will vote for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. I'm guessing too, we're not signing off, like this is a briefing, we're not signing off on this today. This will be on the agenda for next week's council. 20th, the week after.
At the committee meeting.
Oh, the committee meeting's doing it. Excellent.
Oh,
Shane. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
No, Lucy, go.
I just suddenly thought of something I meant to say earlier, which is some of you may have heard of the Canterbury Mayoral Forum's initiative around housing, and I just wanted to reassure you that this is complementary with that. The focus of that is very much on the non-high growth areas, but the areas experiencing tourism pressure and rural stress around housing. And so I just wanted to make sure that if you've heard of that, so have we, and I'm working very closely with Marie to make sure that we're each building on each other's.
Oh, thank you. And Sophie, thank you for the work that you did on the group. Yep.
Thank you, Sophie, for your championship.
Shane.
Kia ora, Sam. Tēnā rā tātou katoa, re mihi ana kia koutou. Thank you very much for all of the work that's gone into the production of the report, and also the partnership. Certainly is most needed as part of the original working group that we put together as council to look at the possibility for affordable housing. We certainly made the intent clear then that we're those of us were supportive of an initiative that supported housing for those less fortunate and for succession of our babies, of our young people, and so forth. I guess that Sam, you've mentioned that it'll come to a full council because there are difference of opinions, and if this is in our wheelhouse, this type of arrangement, and certainly I've been a supporter from the start. So, in principle, absolutely support the direction to move forward. The question I have is around the critical role of councils, and you've got that mentioned there, but as Sophie has also talked about, an enabling and mapping, and yes, the concern that potentially have on the horizon is a community that potentially may be displaced, whether it's our responsibility or not. There will be good intention to possibly provide something in the soon to interim time, and questions around typology and what does fit the aesthetic of our current urban planning and setting. That might be a Ben question, but certainly yes, supportive of this moving forward. Kia ora.
Yeah, I think that you raised some really important points just before you go, Ben. Well, this is MHUD has been very supportive of this, so they're part of the partnership. But the reason why the first actions all focus on councils is obviously with the election having been so recent. I thought rather than wait till the new Minister of Housing has his plan firmed up, let's get on with the bits that the councils can do, and phase 2 is much heavier on the central government part. But I think the point here was also to look at the statutory mechanisms that the councils have at their fingertips. So ECAN, with the Canterbury Regional Policy Statement, has a really important role to fill in terms of setting out the regional parameters, and the councils with their district plans and other mechanisms. So hopefully this is consistent with that and can lead to that.
Yeah, and typology is always a challenge in Selwyn. We've got a lot of standalone, but not the other ones. As we get older, we'll need those smaller units. So a lot of these actions here are trying to figure out ways to make that happen sooner than later as well.
Just supplementary, the only reason I asked that, I stayed at a Duval group in Manukau last week, and it's quite a high rise. It goes way the heck up, and they've got a lot of them there. But I thought, man, this is a wonderful facility. All young, well, mostly young people. They had a big gym and a pool. Everyone was exercising, and it was really great. And I thought it probably wouldn't suit aesthetically, but certainly there's, food for thought there.
Cool, thank you. There's nothing else from Councillor. Is there any final comments you'd like to make, Ben or Lucy, and then we'll move on to the next part of the presentation?
No, so yeah, these are actions that we're investigating. So anything we need to do after that after we've signed this off, will come back through processes. So this is just work that our teams are working on already to help out. So yeah, that's the level of commitment at the moment.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Ta.
Tēnā koutou.
Tracy.
I'm not going around.
George coming up.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, guys.
Damn. Do you want to intro this one, Sam, as well?
No, Ben, I'll let you intro this one. Sorry, I don't want to.
Done so well. Yeah, so this is a briefing for the spatial plan. So it's been a good journey on this. So we're here to present following the hearings late last year and where we've got to on this. So I've got Tracy here to help set out some of the bigger partnership stuff. George, who was involved in the hearing process, to help out talking through the changes that were recommended, and I'm here to do a dance or something at some point. No. So yeah, I'll hand over to Tracy to help set some context, and then we'll just work through a presentation, and questions at the end would be great.
Kia ora koutou. So Tracy Tierney, Director Greater Christchurch Partnership. You may have seen me a couple of times. Real honour to be out here today, and really appreciate Ben and George. And I am going to take my chance because I don't get the chance to talk very often. But I do just genuinely want to thank the staff who've been involved in this process, right through from Tim to Ben to George to a really wide range, who not only advocated really clearly on behalf of Selwyn, but have just taken a really collaborative view to problem solving, because this has been a heck of a journey. And I just wanted to publicly kind of acknowledge that team. So I just wanted to start off with that. So today is really about, you've heard about the draft plan. This is about, well, what journey did it go through with the panel? And again, really want to acknowledge Councillor Reid, who's been done copious amounts of reading and really valuable input into the hearings process, but just useful to give a little bit of background. So the partnership's got a great history of working together collaboratively. And the key thing with the spatial plan work is it keeps building on the strong base of past work. So it's not starting from scratch, which I think is really important to remember. We didn't, when we went out and talked to the community, we didn't get radically different signals that they wanted something different. So it has travelled a path, but it gets further and further emphasised and refined and focused is probably how I describe it. So there's a whole lot of background documents that have gone into this and where we're at today, which is there's been the hearings process, the partnership committee has received the panel's recommendations and has endorsed it. Because it is also meets the needs of each council's future development strategy, it belongs to each council to then consider the recommendations and consider this, adopting this as a future development strategy. So again, one of the benefits of working in partnership is that instead of the 3 councils who have to complete this doing this themselves in isolation on repeat, you've got the collective wisdom, but also, you know, there's benefits to working collectively in terms of time, cost and involvement, but actually it's beneficial for our communities to sit and have that level of alignment. So that's where we're at today. I think I'll pass over to Ben.
So yeah, we have that collective responsibility to deliver this future for Greater Christchurch. We've got the growth in our population coming through. Lucy touched on a few of those things about migration as well. We've got the economic opportunity that generates alongside trying to combine all those challenges with the knowledge and context of our region that we hold. And so the goal of the spatial plan is to sort of set a blueprint for the for how we could accommodate 700 to 1 million people within this area to ensure that we can direct growth into the areas that we want to see, so we get some of those benefits and those gains. And it will be AFDS. Done that. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So there's been a range of engagement and consultation. So we started off with the hui hui mai stuff. So we had 7,000 people respond to that. We talked to them about what the vision for the future for Greater Christchurch is, what they want, what they don't want to see, and what can we do. Talking about where we live, how we get around, how we adapt to climate change, and how do we continue to protect the environment and the people, the land, whilst encouraging our community to grow. And so that kind of feedback and that stuff has underpinned what we've developed. There was the online surveys, there were drop-in sessions, there was workshops, and high support. And so lots of people, about 56% of people, were open to the idea of higher density living, knowing that it needs to be well planned and well designed around and supported by public transport. So that was also really good. And there was also some really good youth engagement that we'll touch on as well. Oh, I'm still going. All right. So then after the engagement, we developed it up and we took it to a more formal consultation process. So there was 350 submissions received. The teams worked together to prepare a report. And there's in that picture, there's Councillor Reid enjoying that. Fully engaged. 86 people over those days came and presented and talked and learned everything on the partnership. And that was done end of the year, October, November.
Comment on that slide in particular. So that one was the youth engagement, and that was done, we felt as a panel that was done really well and see as a model going forward. That was a day, it was held at the university and different groups came in and saw us, and so there'd been quite a bit of time taken to
consult with youth about it. And it is actually their future that we're looking at when we look at it, and it's great to hear those voices and to have it in a space that they feel comfortable with. Otherwise, we had the other hearings that we had we had one here, one Makariri, and the rest were in the Christchurch City Council chambers. So quite a different environment.
Yeah, thank you.
I can talk to this one. So this.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we'll slide it.
Thank you. Yeah, so happy to talk to this one, and I'm really talking on behalf of the panel because they put the hearing panel because they put this slide forward. So Stephen Daish and Councillor Reid will know as chair and co-chair respectively that there was much thanks for everybody who submitted and came to hearings and was involved in the process. I mean, there was a lot of technical and expert work that came through from the project team from Greater Christchurch, but it was really that local voice that really brought things to attention of the panel, and through the submissions brought things to the attention of the officers who prepared the report that went to the hearings panel. So I think this slide is really just an acknowledgement of all the people that put the time, the effort, the mahi to come forward and give their ideas. So, yep, and having said that, I'll just move into the changes that came through the hearings process. Yeah, I thought we covered youth engagement. So yeah, it's quite hard to see on this slide, but the yellow boxes isolate some of the key changes to this framework in the spatial plan, where we have the opportunities, our overarching directions and other directions. And really what this slide highlights is how the panel endorsed the approach taken by the partnership in drafting the plan, and also largely the changes recommended by officers. So I'll go through the recommendations the hearings panel put through, and we'll go on the basis of those opportunities you see at the top, those 6 opportunities. Yeah, no, but first we can go. First, we'll cover those 6 opportunities altogether. They're very distinct, but there's no hierarchy between those opportunities. So, clarification was a point of clarification was recommended by the hearing panel that that there's no hierarchy between the opportunities or prioritization of one over the other. It's about making progress on all of them to progress towards that desired future state for Greater Christchurch. So there is that clarification provided about the opportunities. So sorry, now I'll get into the separate opportunities and some of the changes. So opportunity 1 has been expanded to recognise that we have a broad spectrum of heritage, and that includes our heritage from European settlement as well. So it really just broadens the spectrum of heritage that needs to be considered going forward in the growth and change and development of Greater Christchurch. So there's a new direction included, which is to protect, recognise and restore historic heritage. Opportunity 2, that remains the same. So there's no changes really. It's about reducing and managing risks so that our people, communities, our places are resilient to natural hazards and climate change. There's some really minor changes, and there's largely a change in the language about being more positive. So rather than having areas to protect and avoid, it's about having growth in the right place or growth in appropriate places. So the intention is that this language is changed to align with these as being opportunities, things that we aspire to, and just has a more positive language going forward. There's also explicit reference to renewable energy and a low carbon future. But opportunity 3 has been enhanced. It's about protecting areas with significant natural values and not simply avoiding development in them. So again, that change of positive language. So rather than what was previously avoid development as a direction, we've got protect areas with significant natural values. So a positive change in the language. That's a consistent theme through the hearing panel's recommendations. The panel also suggested or recommended that we strengthen the wording and around the green belt to make it clear that it would act as a transition between urban and rural areas. It was previously a buffer, and there's been some more detailed explanation of what the green belt could be, but it's a largely quite open concept that's going to form part of the investigation as part of the blue-green network strategy, which is an action of the spatial plan, and there's an investigation into what the green belt exactly is. Opportunity 4, and this kind of runs on the coattails of what Lucy just presented to on in terms of our housing, our urban form. So opportunity 4 has been enhanced to ensure that new development aligns with the framework for significant urban centres and major towns in the spatial plan, ensures that the growth of these towns are accessible to public transport, and really the success of the whole spatial plan hinges on the interrelationship between transport and intensification, but recognising that there's a balance of housing and housing choice, and that there's going to be lots of different types of developments in housing in the future. So just to outline some of the notable changes to opportunity 4, there's the addition of quality alongside diverse and affordable housing, recognising that housing is a human right, and having access to a warm, dry, safe, stable home is a really important aspect of providing housing across the sub-region. There was also some there's also a change about how we identify broad locations for housing going forward. So it's really clear to the development community and the development sector that we're relying on to deliver the change that we want to see, the areas that are in principle supported. So there was a new set of criteria, I suppose, that outlines exactly where these broad locations could go and what it needs to meet to be supported. So separate to greenfield, the criteria for broad locations could be brownfield or greenfield. So that's another key change under that opportunity. Move to opportunity 5. Opportunity 5 has expanded to recognise that we need to support business and research, particularly around primary production and thinking about the skills we need for the future. So the panel considered that the impacts of urban growth on primary production wasn't sufficiently covered in the first draft of the spatial plan. So there's been some changes to directions, notably direction 5.4, that urban growth occurs in locations that does not compromise the ability of primary production activities to expand or change, including adapting to a lower emissions economy. And another direction, that growth occurs in locations and patterns that protects strategic, regionally and nationally important tertiary institutes. So I think that's a really important additions when we think of the Selwyn lens of Greater Christchurch, particularly in and around Lincoln, with Lincoln University and the CRIs. So there's been some specific recognition of that under Opportunity 5, which is about business and business, land and the economy. Opportunity 6, which is transport, a really key part of the spatial plan is transport. Opportunity 6 had some changes, I'll go into them. Really, there was some changes about freight routes and how the focus on mass rapid transport, MRT, is integral to the desired settlement pattern, the desired form of growth for Greater Christchurch, and it's needed to support the targeted intensification around centres and corridors. But Opportunity 6 was amended to prioritise sustainable as well as accessible transport choices. I'm thinking it's not just about decarbonising our transport, but making sure that it's accessible to everyone and it's easy to get around, do business, stay productive. So that was a great change from the hearings panel. Another change is some clarification around development capacity. That development capacity, as understood by the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, allows for some changes for the long term, some reasonable adjustments in terms of the relationship between costs and return for calculating capacity. So that just reflects a different approach by Selwyn and Waimakariri to Christchurch City. So that's just been made clear where there were questions why long-term development capacity was the same as the medium-term capacity for Christchurch City. So that was something that came up over the hearings, and that point of clarification is now in the spatial plan. Priority areas was a huge focus of the hearings process, particularly around Eastern Christchurch. So there has been a change to refer to Eastern Christchurch as a priority regeneration area. It largely recognises the different needs and opportunities and challenges facing that part of Otatahi Christchurch. Also under this opportunity was consideration of the airport noise contours. So the panel largely agreed with the process put with the recommendations of officers that consideration of the new modelled airport noise contours is best left to the review of the regional policy statement, and that will be notified later this year. In the meantime, the spatial plan has been amended to set out that the operative airport noise contours, as they show in our district plan, are included, and acknowledges that the change to the contours will come later this year. Those are pretty much a whistle-stop tour of the key changes of the hearing panel's report.
So just to wrap up on the transport stuff. So as you see in the spatial plan, there's a key focus on how we improve our public transport. So there's two key pieces of work underway at the moment: is the PT Futures work and the MRT work, and there will be so we'll have those ongoing things alongside the other housing action plan and some of the blue-green work that we're looking at too. So there will be another briefing on those PT MRT bits later on in the year than now as well. So, but the other key piece of work underway in the GCP space. Questions?
Thank you, Ta, for the presentation. I guess there's a couple of things that stand out in what you've shared that might be news for the first time. One is around the no hierarchy within. Like on one hand, that's good, and it feels like everyone's included and all aspects are equal. But in the end, decisions have to be made about what things happen in what order, and actually not providing that hierarchy can lead to more confusion, and then can just add to an issue being argued based on the strength of a person in the room at the time, rather than the general direction of the spatial plan. And the whole idea behind the spatial plan is to get things nutted out early so that you don't have to deal with them through resource consent or individual arguments. So can you just talk a little bit about where the no hierarchy leaves us and how you might see that playing out around individual decisions?
Yeah, and I can certainly see that concern. I think the panel felt really strongly that at a strategic level they were equal, and that was where that sentiment was coming from on behalf of submitters. But absolutely, in terms of it becomes implementation based, which is absolutely then going to need to take a prioritisation pathway. So one of the discussions that needs to be held at a committee level and then following at a partnership level are those prioritisations. So what is in the plan, it has I think 7 or 8 point work program, which is at a very high level. Discussion then becomes, which do we do first? Some will happen concurrently. It's given that flex as governors to say, given what we know today, our resources in need, and that may change. So I think, in fact, that having no hierarchy to the opportunities provides that flex.
The opportunities are also quite complementary, so it will be difficult for someone to be on this one, but I'm not doing that as well. So it should be limited in terms of that as well.
Cool. Airport contours, that covers future development for Rolleston. Thinking about the time when that argument will come up again, and how do we think about that and prepare for that as a council, recognising that we need the airport to remain open 24 hours a day. It's a strategic part of Canterbury, and particularly important for us and the businesses and people travelling from and within Selwyn, but that doesn't need to unnecessarily restrict residential medium density living underneath those airport contours, with the appropriate building mechanisms in place to ensure that those people live inside and those buildings are healthy and the noise reduction is included at the building consent space. Or can you just talk to how that's going to play out?
Yeah, so there's the first step is to do the mapping, which is looking at changing the what we call the pterodactyl sting to some other weird animal. So that may change what bit of land is covered by the contours, and then the next step for ECAN is to take that and say, well, what is the policy for managing development underneath that, and whether there is scope to say, on those outer bits in the 50 to 55 space, whether there is mitigations you can do to enable development there. At the moment, though, it's only potentially residential and some commercial that is limited, but we could look at whether commercial is there or not as well. But that would probably come through the RPS in this year's changes. That would be the policy there that would have to then follow in our district plan. Yeah.
And the councillors that were here last term, this work came on the back of the mapping that was done. You might remember at Lincoln Event Centre, there was we had the map, and it was done in town at Turanga as well, where we had natural hazard maps, we had soil maps, we had a range of issues that we were trying to figure out where things would sit and lie, and your input then has helped feed into some of the decision making of where we got to now. So while this is reporting back on kind of the key end of the process, there's been a couple of years in the making to get us this far.
I was just going to add really quickly, Sam, that through the hearings, the officers' report and the hearings process, that obviously the airport came and presented to the hearings panel, and there was a change recommended by the officers to change, protect strategic infrastructure, which would include the airport, to language around carefully managed, because the spatial plan will be informing the next Canterbury Regional Policy Statement. I wanted to leave it open to the management options for strategic infrastructure. Sometimes that you'll want to avoid, sometimes you want to mitigate, and there's a range of options. So I just want to say that the door is open through the RPS to consider the range of options under the new contour.
We've obviously had quite a bit of GPC special stuff come across our desk, and I've looked at it with great interest. I really enjoy using the public transport going into Wellington from the heart, and I was thinking to myself, why does that work so effective versus LaGrange Township in Kentucky? I don't know if you're familiar with LaGrange in Kentucky, but it has a train that runs directly through the centre. And the key difference is that Wellington has the train on the outskirts. It doesn't run through where the pedestrians are and the people are. They walk to that from where they live. And then in Wellington, in the city, they use buses that don't have any, obviously the railways on the edge of the town, on the city there. Whereas LaGrange has been massively affected by the railway. It's basically turned into a ghost town, having that in the centre. And it has a population of only 10,000 people, where all its neighbouring cities are in the 6.5 million range. So I just want to point that out, that whatever we do here, we need to get this really right. We need to not just pull something out of the sky, we need to make sure we're looking at what's happening internationally and get it right. And I was quite concerned with the mapping and what looked to be the proposal, where you've got the artist's impression of the future layout is very, very wide. So it looks as though you're running private vehicles, public transport down the city, cycle lanes, walk lanes on both sides of the street. Now, to have that in the planned layout that you've got is going to incur an enormous amount of buyout of all the existing properties all along that pathway. Secondly, a huge amount of demolition, and thirdly, a massive amount of cost to rebuild the structure and the infrastructure, just to then allow the developers the opportunity to build the higher density living in conjunction with that. Is that what the long-term plan of this is, or has that been modified from that artist's impression to just work within the layout of the land and the streets as we have them now?
I think artist's impression is exactly what it is. So it's sitting there and saying, in one place, in one example, this could be what it looked like, or it could absolutely not be what it looks like. And so there's been many years' work going into understanding where those routes might be and understanding current road widths and uses. So in terms of intensification and MRT, they are co-dependent and will be developed over time. But I think it's really important to remember that actually it starts with public transport now. We're trying to aim to a turn up and go service because we know that's what will encourage use. That will then iterate to say, well, if we're starting to get the turn up and go, you're starting to get people choosing to develop their properties more because they can have more people living with them, more whānau, and then it starts to then build the patronage that says some other form like light rail or something alternative will be required. So I think there's a lot of water to go under the bridge into what it's going to look like. Is there a master plan to take bid widths and No, there isn't.
Then,
And
then
that's,
the proposal that you've got at the moment doesn't work, because then you would have the same problem as Michigan, where the public transport has to continually stop to work with the pedestrians and the traffic as the land lays at the moment. So we're no more advancing to where we are already.
so I think the first step for that is the PT Futures, which I'm aware you will have been briefed on a number of times. There'll be further briefings going on that, because that's actually the precursor to anything that is mass rapid transit related. So it'll be done on an iterative basis with the community to build that patronage and reflects the investment that's willing to be made in it. So, you know, I think it's a journey. Why I quite like the expression turn up and go, because that's what everyone's aiming for. If you make it a turn up and go services, whatever that looks like. So if you give on our current roading, just continue to enhance bus access way, for example. So it might be, one of the steps might be a regulatory one that says absolutely nobody else can use those bus lanes. So there's lots of things that you can do to start stepping towards to give primacy to public transport to enable it. So we're kind of at the start phase of building that journey.
Thank you. Megan.
Oh, kia ora. The spatial plan, unlike the joint housing action plan, I actually was an advisor into the spatial plan, so I just want to put that out the front. However, I didn't see, I stopped working on this at the time that it went into hearing, like just before the hearing. So it's really good to see the outcome of this, because there has been an enormous amount of work gone into this, lots of public engagement, and thank you, Nicole, for representing Selwyn interests in the space on the panel. Kind of. And also, it's interesting to see it land there at the other side. I feel like I've started this journey into the planning space, and the spatial plan is following me everywhere. 2 weeks ago when I wasn't here, it was because I was at Waimakariri doing the airport noise contours hearing. And the Greater Christchurch Partnership adopted this on Friday, and the public wanted it actually implemented on the Monday. So really interesting. However, my engagement with it today means that I can actually ask 2 quite well-informed questions. And so the first question I have is, mana whenua have said or had a very strong preference throughout all of the engagement on the spatial plan that development in a preferred, an urban form that was more compact was definitely preferred, and that is because compact urban form gave greater protection to wahi tapu, wahi taonga sites. It protects highly productive soil and gave lots of opportunities for restoration initiatives. And so I want to know, the spatial plan that has come to us, does that give effect to, that's my first question, I'll let you answer it before I ask my second, but does it give effect to those aspirations for mana whenua?
I believe it does. It hasn't changed. So that direction was really clear in the draft spatial plan, which mana whenua were supportive of. It was around that more compact form and then targeted intensification, effectively, around those transport nodes. So that was large number of submissions and support, and also people with views against that. The panel have supported the direction, and that's come through in the final plan.
Great, thank you. And the second is about Māori reserves, and it actually might be more of an implementation question about the priority development areas. But mana whenua clearly said that if we continue to consistently represent where the pā are now, the existing pā are now, on all of the planning maps, then that actually really kind of constricts opportunities for development. And mana whenua wanted to see opportunities or enabling provisions so that reserves could actually exist in urban environments as well. Does this plan do that?
I think the plan creates a framework for it, but you're absolutely right. The implementation of the priority development areas is where that will be given life to. So in the document, it talks about the priority development areas, of which our Māori Reserve is very strong in there. So when it then becomes a conversation around the implementation, it's where does that sit? How do we give effect to it? How do we work alongside the Kāinga Nohoanga strategy? And that becomes for the committee as a first step to think about its priorities. So one of the pieces of work staff are actually working on will be working on is how do we prioritise those priority development areas? What can we be working on concurrently? What makes sense to actually give effect to those aspirations? So I think that's going to be a really crucial conversation with mana whenua about what does that look like, and how do we knit that into the implementation, how that feeds into transport and housing and all those pieces. So there'll be a piece of work around prioritisation of priorities.
No, great. That's really good. And I just wanted to apologise, Nicole. When I say kind of, I only mean in the sense of I don't know if you're there as an independent or for us. But thank you for your time.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very, very much for your presentation and all the work. It's been kind of cool just watching from the outside. I was on GCP for the beginning part, and now just kind of looking and keep an eye on. It's been really interesting, and I do like the lack of hierarchy. I take the point that it might cause complications at some point, but without having that, so when you do have a hierarchy, it seems that inevitably the economic factors tend to dictate over and above the environmental and the social factors. And if there's no hierarchy, that means everyone gets probably a bit of a trade-off, but at least it's all still there somehow. And I quite like, in some ways, we're going to be benefiting from the fact that we're a bit late to this sort of game, because there are lots of bad examples that we can learn from, but there are also lots of really good examples that we can learn from. I guess the hardest part's going to be finding the examples that are of cities, towns and cities of about 500,000 to 1 million, rather than going and looking at places that have 10 million people. And we can't copy those solutions, but we can copy, there are others that will be better suited for us to look at. There is a question here, I promise. In terms of Selwyn, because we've just adopted our district plan, so does this then mean that we'll be gradually looking towards some council initiated plan changes and updates and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so we'll be doing our future Selwyn stuff, so that this bit applies to the Greater Christchurch element, and we'll look at the full thing. So we'll try and give more Selwyn lens to some of the direction here, and start looking at our own spatial picture for Selwyn, and then as we work through the area plans underneath that, to start translating that onto the ground stuff. Then from those area plans, there will need to be district plan changes, and there'll be changes to whatever else we're doing in the organisation. So yeah, this is a start. Here's a sub-regional one that we can then take to build our district one that takes it to build our towns to get to the changes. So eventually, yes.
Thanks, Sophie. Good question, because at the moment it's a map with some big arrows, around it. So to get that level of detail will be good. I just highlight too for the room, this was a piece of work started before the last government said you should do spatial planning as a region, and has continued after the current government said don't do it. So regardless of what the governments have said, we were already on this track and we're finishing it regardless. And so good to see this level of leadership, I think, from the combined sub-region to do this work without having to be told to do it, because we can see it has been really important for our community. Thank you for taking the time to come in today. Ben, did you have any final comments you'd like to close off with?
No, I could go off on a tangent, but I'll restrain myself.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I think Ben's good. Your black cap start later this week.
I think Ben promised us a dance, didn't he?
A dance.
Oh, yeah, that was later. We'll turn the live stream off.
Sorry, just to plug, given the discussion around international examples, I think it's really valid. There is an amazing gentleman called Salvador Rueda who's presenting to the Christchurch Conversations tomorrow night, and I had the privilege of meeting him yesterday, and I can only say I can see why he works with cities all over the world, and it is everything he's got to teach and learn is totally transferable to cities no matter what size, and how you actually really cost effectively through your transport, through your planning, can deliver really good outcomes that I got quite excited about. So encourage you, if you can't attend, we'll certainly send around a link. It'll be recorded, but it's great to soak up those international examples. So just wanted to put a plug in for Salvador.
And so the adoption of the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan is on next week's council meeting agenda. Okay. So we'll be back doing that.
Thank you. Ta, Tracy.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Councillors, we'll adjourn the meeting, take a break, and then we'll come. Well, actually, that brings us to the end of the public part of today's briefing. So we'll stop the recording and we'll take